This is week 4, the week on Java classes. We're going to discuss chapter 7. And in the past, all we've used integers and doubles and characters and strings for the different data types. But that's not always, that does not give us enough information. Sometimes the data types, there is a string and there is a double, and there might be characters, there might be combinations of different types of variables. And what we do to increase or to include such a variable is we create a class, and that class will define all the elements that we can set for this complex variable. And it'll allow us to manipulate the data, do calculations on the data within the class. When we use a user-defined class, it combines our data, like I said, and the methods, and it does operations on the data. The advantage is that we can validate the data. We can make sure they don't change a variable in such a fashion that will cause methods not to correctly compute things. And because they're using the method, but they're not seeing the code, that's an advantage. We can make changes to the class, and those class that change will ripple through every class that uses it. Okay? And you don't have to worry about changing the code in any of those. That's a good building block. Now, what is a client class? A client class is, once we've created a class, we have to have a class that will allow us to test our code. And usually we have a client class that'll do that. It'll allow us to instantiate the objects, call the methods from the class, and set values and get different calculations that we need. One of the tips that we should always note is that a class is always a noun. You try to use a noun, and you're going to also capitalize, starts with a capital letter. That's important. Okay, these are words that you should be aware of. Their fields are instant variables. Data for each object, for example, could be a constant, like the color blue, green, yellow. Those are set values. Then you can have other data that you share. You can have variables that you share. You can have methods that you share. And what determines whether or not you can share something or not is the access modifier. It will determine the rights within the class and outside. And these are the access modifiers. Public is the most common. That's something that you would share. Most classes are public. That means that I can create an instant of that object in another class. Private would be something that I would want to hide from others. Be able to allow them some access by using various methods within the class, but be able to regulate what's going on. Protected means that it'd be available to all subclasses, and subclasses inherit. We're jumping ahead here. This ideal of subclasses. When you use a class and you inherit the methods. Let's just go really quickly. I just want to talk really quickly about that. This right here is the math class, okay? And it has a series of methods. Let's just take a look at it. I have math. Let me move my dot. These right here are the constants that are available. It's E, and this is pi, and these are all the methods that are available to me in the math class. Okay, so if I want to do here I'm going to say this particular class is going to use the maximum method. And that's something that we can use. So when we're talking about methods and sharing, that's what I mean by subclasses. Subclass is any class that I'm using the class in. And so that particular class would be a subclass that is using the math method. Another thing it talks about is packages. And I know that when you create your classes, you see this little, you see this up at the top that's called package. Here it says package student. And if I look at the projects, notice that I have a source packages. This one right here, this source packages, I have one that's called student. So student client and student would be able to access any of the protected methods, any of the protected values, variables or constants. It would be able to do that. And let's go on. There's also an access modifier where they don't even indicate, and that also can be used for anything in the same class, but only in the same class. It has to be in the same class. If it's not, you can't use it. Alright, so I want to just look at this example about a student and calculate the grade, because right now in your grade books you don't always get the right percentage. So we're going to just look at how to do the calculations. Right now I have the first name, the last name, the GID number, and then I have scores for the discussion posts. And those discussion posts are worth 20%. Then I have the scores for the assignments from 1 to 8, week 8, and they're worth 70%. Then I have scores for the midterm and the final, which are worth 10%. And I want to calculate the grade. So let's go back to NetBeans. And I've created a student class. Within that student class, I have some variables, and all those variables I've set to private. The first name, the last name, the GID number, the discussion posts for weeks 1 through 8, their scores, and for the assignments scores for weeks 1 through 8. Alright, so then I have a midterm and a final exam, and I want to calculate the grade. And because these are set to private, any class that has access to this particular student, this student class, will not be able to see those. But we want to be able to allow them to make changes, but we want to validate those changes. Okay? So when I start the class, I'm going to start it by passing it the person's first name, their last name, and their GID number. And then I'm going to set those equal to my private variables right here. Now there are certain methods called getter methods. A getter method will go get the variable that you're asking for and return its value. And then we always start with the method in lowercase, and the first word that's different we capitalize, and they call it the camel, like humps, okay? The camel effect. So the methods always will start with lowercase, and they will increase. They'll have like the first name will be capitalized, and first will be capitalized, name will be capitalized, and then it will just return a string. And in this case, the string is the first name. In this particular case, I have a setter method which will allow me to make some changes to my data. For example, what if the person's last name changed? Or what if I typed in the incorrect first name? I need to be able to make that change. So the setter method, I would pass it a string variable with the name, and it would set the first name. The same thing I'm going to do a getter and a setter for the last name. Anything that I want the user to be able to change, I would use a getter and a setter I use a setter to change it, a getter for them to be able to access that particular piece of information. And I can put different things within the methods to validate the data. So here we have for the discussion, to get the discussion grade, and then this one right here sets the discussion value. I make sure that the value is greater than 0, so it's always going to be the maximum of 0 and whatever number they put in here. So if they put a negative number, it's just going to go to 0. And that's what it means by validating the data. I can decide what that value is going to be ultimately. And I'll do that for each one of my discussion grade posts, and then for my assignments. Okay, for my assignments, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to have here, and I'll do the same things for my midterm and my final. And then what I'm going to have is I'm going to put another method in here. And this method I want, for my own reasons, I want to initialize all the scores. Right here I'm going to set all the scores equal to 0 for the discussion posts and the assignments, midterm, and final exam, and then for the grade as well. Then I'm going to do a calculate grade method, and I want to pass two pieces of information. Has midterm been taken? That's a true or false. And how many weeks of data do I have? Because that's important as well. So I'm going to calculate the averages for the assignment, the average for the discussion post, and the average for the exams. And notice I've included comments in here. In your book, if you see that they haven't included as many comments, it's because they're trying to save space. In this particular case, what I've done is I've taken all the grades for the discussion post, D1, D2, D3, D4, D5, D6, D7, D8, and I divided it by 35 to get an average of what the discussion post score is, and then I've divided it by also the number of values. Okay, so this is going to make it a percentage. I'm doing the same thing for assignments. I'm going to add all the assignments together, divided by 100, because each assignment is worth 100, and then divided by n, the number of assignments that we've gone through so far. And then this one right here is the midterm and the exam. The midterm's worth 100 points, and the final exam is worth 160. So that's why I divided each of those, that one by 100 and this one by 160, and then divided both of them by 2 to get the average. Now, if the midterm has been taken, then what I want to do is I want to apply the percentages to each of the calculations that I've had. I have 20% of the discussion percentage, 70% of the assignment percentage, and then 10%, sorry, of the exam percentage, and that has to be an E right there. And that, if I look at 0.2 plus 0.7 plus 0.1, that's a total of 1. If, on the other hand, the midterm has not been taken, then I want to make sure that I'm weighing my grade correctly. I'll do 20% of the discussion posts, 70% of the average assignments, and then I'm going to divide by 0.9 because we haven't included any of the exams yet. So we're not going to include that 10% yet. And then it returns the grade that it's calculated. Okay, so then most methods, or most classes have a two-string method in it, and it usually summarizes some of the information that's in the calculations and some of the things that it's done. In this particular case, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to use a decimal format and have percent pattern, and my percent pattern is going to have two places behind the decimal point with the percentage. Alright, and then I have here, I have a total string. It starts out empty, and then I'll put the last name then first name on one line. On the next line I'm going to put their GID number, and then I will put their discussion grade on the next line, all their discussion grades and their assignment grades, their midterm exam score and their final exam score, and then finally their grade percentage, and then I'll return that toString. Now to actually test whether or not all the things that we set up in student works, I'm going to use the student client class, and I'm going to I created that by just going to the projects and go into the here, and I'll right click and I'll say new and then Java class. Okay, now when I made this particular Java class, the Java class did not have, let me just go ahead and show you. I'm just going to make a new Java class. Okay, notice it doesn't have a main method, so we're going to have to put a main method in it in order for it to run. So I'll get rid of this here. Okay, so I'm going to go to the client class and I'm going to create the main method. So I put public static void main string arguments args, and then I start to put my code. I have a decimal format percent pattern that I want to use, because if I go and get the grade calculate grade method, I would like to format it in as a percentage. Now I'm going to instantiate and initialize some variable, the student variable, to st. I'm passing it Joe Ellen Green and then my ID. I'm initializing it to 0, and then I'm going to set my discussion, and then let me just show you how to do that. If I do this, these are all the methods that we created in student. All of these we created in student. There's some defaults, but mostly all of these we've created. So that's how I'm going to set my discussion post grade to 35, my second discussion post to 35, my third discussion post to 25, and then here I've set my assignments to 100 for the first one, 100 for the second one, and 95 for the third one. And then if I do my calculation, I can say grade. Now notice that this is a local variable called grade, is equal to st.calculateGrade, and I'm saying that no, we haven't taken the midterm yet, and we have three different scores that we've entered. And what we're going to do here is print out the grade as a percent pattern, and then we're going to print out the string. So let's go ahead. I'm going to save it, and here we have it. We have the grade where I specifically asked for the particular calculate method is 96.59. I have the first and last name, the GID number, the discussion values, the assignment values, midterm and final exam, and then the grade score. And that concludes our discussion on classes. Hi, this is a discussion on the Java classes for Chapter 7. In the past, we've been using classes, and those classes usually have a main method in it, and it has the class name, and we've been able to do a few calculations that have to do with doubles and integers and characters and strings. We also had an example where we used a class without the main method, and we were able to look at an applet and see a drawing within the NetBeans. But that's that's very confining. Sometimes we need combinations of integers and doubles and strings to define an object. And we need to use those values to do some calculations. And that's why the object-oriented programming language is so wonderful, because we can create classes and then use those variables and methods to do calculations that we can use elsewhere. As I said, we can combine the data to do calculations in the methods. The advantage is we can use those methods to validate or to make sure that our data is what it should be. So if you have a balance, you can make sure someone doesn't put in negative 10,000 into a savings account. It would automatically set it equal to 0 if you put that information into your methods. What's good about it is they can use the methods, but they can't change the methods. Okay, so it's like a black box. You have how to access it, what it will hand back, and it'll tell you what to put in the what parameters to send, and that's very useful because it can be used over and over again. A client class is usually where, after we've created a class, we use it to instantiate the object and to test our code. When we create a class, we always want to make it start with excuse me, a capital letter, and it's usually a noun. In that class, you're going to have constants, variables, and methods. And how do we determine whether a class has a right to change values or use different methods? We use the access modifiers. And these are the most common. Most commonly used is public. And that allows you to access something, to access a class, or access its methods, or access its variables. And let's just take a look. I'm going to look at this class that I've created here. And we can go down here. This particular class, I'm going to use the math class, and notice that the math class has two constants, the e and the pi, and all of these are methods that can be used. All of these are methods that are created in the math class. And the one that we're going to use the math maximum. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that the assignments are always going to be positive by using the math max method. Okay. Let's start talking about this particular class that we started talking about, a student class. Right now, if you look at your grades in the grade book, it doesn't always show you the correct percentage. So if you were to write a little program to do the calculations of really what your grade is at any particular point in time, let's start by doing that. Okay, so we have within the student class, we want to enter their first name, their last name, their GID number. We want the scores for the discussion post for weeks 1 through 8 and the assignment for weeks 1 through 8. We want the midterm and the final exam and the grade. Okay, to start off, this is what's called the constructor. This is how we introduce the object into another class, by using this student, and we're going to pass its first name, last name, and GID number. and we'll set it equal to the variables. Notice that all the variables are private, so that means they're hidden from the other users that use this class, and the only way that they can be accessed is using what's called a getter method, because we say get first name and then we return the first name. And then setter methods are mutator methods, and that's usually the set method. So we set the first name, we pass it a string, and then we set that string to the first name. So we can go get the information, and we can also set it. And so I have that for each of the variables I've defined up here. All of them that I want the user to be able to reset or to get, I have a method here for each one of them, except the grade. Okay, and these are for all the assignments, and for the midterm and the final. And then I have another method. This is a user method I've created for myself. I wanted to set all my scores equal to 0. Before I do any calculations, I wanted to do that. And then finally, the reason for the class is to calculate my grade. And I'm going to pass it back as a double, and it's going to pass the parameters, and the parameters are going to be, was the midterm taken, and then how many exams or how many discussion posts and assignments have you completed. And I will have the average assignment, the average discussion posts, and the average exams. Those are what I'm going to calculate. So what I'm going to do here is I sum up all the discussion posts 1 through 8 divided by 35, because 35 is each of the scores are scores for the discussion posts, so worth 35 points, times the number of assignments that we've completed, or discussion posts that we have completed. And so we do the same thing for assignments. Assignment 1 through assignment 8 divided by 100 this time, because each one of those is worth 100 points, times the number that we've completed so far, the number of weeks that we've completed. And then we have the average of the exams. Now the midterms are worth 100 points, and the final exam is worth 160. So that's why I divided the midterm by 100 and the final exam by 160, and then divided that by 2. So I'm going to get a percentage in each one of those variables. Now if the midterm is not taken, the reason why we need this information is I need to know the weighting. You get 20% for the discussion post, you get 70% for the assignments, and then 10% for the final exams. If no exams are taken, only 90% of the grade has been utilized, because we've only done discussion posts and assignments, and we need to reflect that in calculating the grade. So if the midterm had been taken, we would include 20% of the discussion posts, 70% of the assignments, and 10% of the exams. And if I add the weights, 0.2 plus 0.7 plus 0.1, I'll get 1. So I don't have to divide by anything. But if I look at the grade and I've only calculated, I'm going to just go ahead and put a 0 in front of that, 20% of the discussion posts plus 70% of the assignments, and that's all we've done thus far. We notice that the weights are 20% plus 70%, that's 90%. So I have to divide the scores by 0.9, and that'll give me the correct grade, and then it will return the grade. This is telling me to return. One of the methods that every class has is a to-string, and it's usually a string that summarizes the data and the calculations that are done within the class. In this particular case, I have set the percent pattern, and I've set it to a percentage. I have two places behind the decimal. I have the total string, and this is what I've done. On the first line, I have the last name, comma, first name. On the next line, I have the GID number. And on the next line, I have the discussion grades. And the next line, I have the assignment grades. The midterm exam grade on the next line. And the next line, final exam. And on the next line, I have the grade, and I'm making sure it's formatted as a percentage. And then it returns that string. So now I have a class that does everything I need it to do. Let's test to see whether or not it does it. So I'm going to create a new class called a student client, and I need to make sure I have a public static void main method in it in order to run it. Okay, this is one of the requirements. I have formatting. I'm going to set my formatting, and the reason why I'm going to do this, I know I've already set it in the to string, but when I looked here, let's just go back here, when I did the calculate grade, I just did a strict calculation, and I didn't do any formatting on that. So I can use this particular formatting practice to clean that up. So the first thing I do is instantiate my variable, okay, create the object, pass the parameters used in the constructor, okay, that's the items that I'm passing to the student class. I'm going to initialize all my scores to 0. I'm going to set the values for discussion 1 to 35, to discussion 2 to 35, discussion 3 to 25, and then for assignments 1, 2, and 3, 100, 195. Now this is what I'm looking at. Double grade is ST, and we've shown here if ST is the object for the student class, these are all the methods that are available to us. Okay, from here. These are all the methods right here. All right, and I use the calculate grade method, and I passed it a parameter. No, we haven't taken the midterm, and there are 3. This is at the end of week 3, and it'll calculate the grade and then bring it back and save it in this local variable called grade. Then if I print it out, I can say grade is equal to, and then this is where I have the print percent pattern dot format, and then I put the variable grade in. It'll clean that up. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to print out the string, the to string, which has all my information. Let's go ahead and do that. So here I have it. I have the grade that I've calculated, and then this is to string. It has the first and last, the last comma first name, my GID number, all my scores, all my assignment scores, the midterm exam, the final exam, the grade percentage. And I can do this, what I can do at this particular point in time, I can say st dot, and I can say set, I can say first name, and I can set it equal to John. St dot set last name, and I'm going to say Doe, John Doe. Okay, and then I can do set, and I'm going to initialize all the scores to 0, set my discussion post to 35, set my discussion post 2 to 25, set my discussion posts for 3 equal to 30. And I can set my assignments. And let's say that's 88. And then this one, let's say it's 60. And set assignment 3. Let's put that to 100. Again, I can do a printout. I can print out everything. Just going to do here and just print out the total. And if I look here, I have my calculations for my Joellen Green, and then for John Doe, the grade is 0. Let's look and see what happened. Okay, we did one thing. We didn't ask it to do the calculation, so we need we need a grade. Grade is equal to st.calc grade, and we're going to say FOSS, and we'll put 3 here. So we've calculated the grade, and the grade here is 83.34, and notice that it has the same exact GID number. So I'm going to set the GID number to G89, okay, and I'm going to run it again, and then you can see each one has a separate ID number, a name, and the scores, and here we have the grade. And that concludes our discussion on classes.